The member for Murray.
I am very pleased and indeed proud to second the motion to disallow the implementation, or in fact the law that is a Murray-Darling Basin Plan. And I would like to now continue.
Member for Murray.
I rise to speak on behalf of the people of Murray, the electorate of Murray that I represent. And as the name implies, this is an area in northern Victoria with a boundary of the Great Murray River. Now, it's not in our nature in Murray to simply look the other way when governments deliberately or knowingly do us wrong or are so incompetent that their actions have the power to literally destroy our environment and to destroy our food-growing capacity that in turn destroys us in the future as being economically independent Australians. This is not the first time in Murray that we've had to say no to bad government policy. Ironically, it's typically Labor government policy. We have had to say no before to policy that had the potential to destroy us. In 2007, the Bracks Labor government announced that the drought was seriously hurting Melbourne. It had been forced to put restrictions on people watering their lawns and their concrete and washing their cars. Since that government had failed to build an extra dam or put in decent water recycling works or stormwater harvesting, there was a problem. But they had a great idea. They would push a very big pipeline over the Great Dividing Range and into the Goulburn River at Yea, and then the mighty pumps would be turned on and they'd suck up 74 gigalitres a year out of the irrigator's resource. And bear in mind, this was in the middle of the worst drought on record, and the irrigators at the time were on less than 30% allocation and many of them on zero allocation. But we were told that was not really a problem, since a total of 220 gigalitres a year would be saved in the Goulburn Murray irrigation area, in particular by changing how the irrigation water was measured and by plastic lining some of the channels. Now, of course, this figure of savings was fictitious, it was a nonsense, it was immediately challenged and discredited, but the pipeline was built. There was no business case, there was no detailed public, or in fact any public consultation. It was a done deal inflicted on the Goulburn Valley and the people of the electorate of Murray as simply the right thing to do for the people of Melbourne. No one thought about the food production capacity that was to be lost. No one thought about the devalued irrigation properties, and certainly no one from the government seemed particularly concerned that there was no business case to support the project that they had in mind. Now, a special new bureaucracy was set up to manage this business of finding these mythical savings of water, and they had $1 billion budget to do it. The Northern Victorian Irrigation Renewal Project, as it was called, was of course immediately abolished by the incoming Coalition Baillieu government, and the tasks of that enverp rolled into the Goulburn Murray Water Authority. The Baillieu government did this because they were responding to the damning Ombudsman's report that identified enverp's corrupted behaviour, their unprofessional behaviour, their inefficiencies, their probity issues, their failure to consult properly, failures to properly tender, failures to protect farmers' private interests, insider trading, and so on. I recommend the Minister reads the Ombudsman's report. So yes, we know all about bad governments, what bad governments can do, and how bad plans can damage communities. Well, after an incredible community fight back, we did silence the pumps in the Goulburn River at Yea, in fact in the middle of the flood. The community fought back on that occasion and we won. So you can imagine that the community, my community, is saying to me, we can't lie down now. We can't just wave this Murray-Darling Basin Plan through and say, well, let's hold our breath and hope that the coalition wins at the next election and they can put it right. Like the member for Riverina, I have to say right now, no, this plan is not sufficient for the future of the basin. It doesn't address the social and economic and environmental outcomes that are needed, and that wasn't hard to do. The communities were insulted by the lack of proper consultation. The communities were insulted when it was implied that no farmers had ever tried before to save water or to improve and innovate on their own irrigation properties, that somehow they'd always been profligate in their water use, wasted it, we were told. Because in fact, of course, this plan is about politics. It's about South Australia and it's about the Greens. It's about the Greens saying to this Labor government, when they had to find a partner to move from their minority status, the Greens said, we want two things out of you. We want a carbon tax and we want a Murray-Darling Basin environmental bucket of water as big as we can possibly get. Don't worry about the fact that there are no detailed studies or research about what different icon sites or ecosystems actually do need. Don't worry about the fact that we have actually been putting environmental water down the Murray River, for example into the Barmah-Millewa Forest, since 1979. I repeat, 1979. In 1993, the Murray-Darling Ministerial Council allocated an annual 100 gigalitres to the Barmah-Millewa Forest and its magnificent Ramsar-listed wetlands, which are, of course, mostly in the electorate of Murray. Now, the Greens would have it that all of the Ramsar-listed wetlands and the places of iconic significance are at the bottom of the system, just as you actually exit to the sea. No, in fact, there are significant and, of course, invaluable environmental resources and assets throughout the basin. But as the bill that we unfortunately couldn't stop showed us last night, probably the last of the collection of mismanaged, rushed-in, ad hoc and poorly drafted water bills, the one that was brought in last night, it said to us, look, we've got to take another 450 gigalitres for, keeping the mouth of the Murray open 95% of the time. Yes, the mouth of the Murray was a naturally sand dune type of landscape, and under pre-white person settlement circumstances, the river ran dry and those sand dunes were in fact a barrier between the river and the sea. It's a natural occurrence. But the Greens have convinced Labor that it will be a very good thing if they can have another 450 gigalitres on top of the 1,270 or so already named, so they can flood the upper reaches of the Murray and Goulburn and other major tributary systems, put that extra water down. Now, they know there's a problem, so they said, it's all right, we'll put $1.77 billion extra dollars of the next government's money into that. We'll remove the barriers which at the moment inhibit more water going down without flooding people out, and we'll push that water down to keep the mouth of the Murray open without any actual machinery 95% of the time. Oh, and we'll also improve the salinity content of the lower lakes. Now, a very funny thing happened during the floods recently when the biggest flush of Murray water, fresh Murray water, surged down the system towards the mouth and the sea. Do you know what happened? Because of the barrages and all of the infrastructure, all the works and measures which inhibit the natural and free flowing of water in and out of the lakes and into the Coorong, because all those barrages were in place, that amazing Murray River freshwater surge actually went right on past. And do you know, the lakes, the lower lakes down the bottom of South Australia didn't get much of an EC or salinity freshening or a reduction in their salinity at all. Because you see, it's a sacred cow. I'm not allowed to talk about it. Don't mention it. But the realities are you've also got to look at the barrages and the engineering, much of it very, very old now, that has constricted and constrained natural freshwater flows into those lower lakes and into the Coorong. The Coorong was drained, let's face it. There was drainage works in there in the 1930s. So let's get sensible and real about this plan. This plan is not about rescuing the environmental flows and circumstances of the entire Murray-Darling Basin. What this plan is about is taking water off the food producers and the fibre producers of the biggest fertile crescent in Australia, take the water off them, well, after all, let's face it, they're all coalition seats, and put it into this very big environmental water holder bucket and then boast about it in metropolitan Australia, and don't worry about the fact that you don't have any environmental watering plans, you don't know exactly when and how the water will be used, There is no actual statement in the plan which acknowledges that it's not just about add water and stand back. You actually have to have natural resource management plans which cover the whole basin. And of course in Victoria and in the member for Riverina's area, we do have those plans. We know that to have the rivers flow well, you also have to have plans which look at biodiversity beyond the river and the riparian zones. You have to look at feral animals and weeds. You have to look at things like the potential for revegetation, fencing out biodiversity. All those other elements of work need to be done, besides just pumping down as much water as you can buy off so-called willing sellers in the teeth of the worst drought on record, and then stand back and say, hey, how good are we? We're the first ones in 100 years. That's what the minister said. We're the first ones in 100 years to address these problems. No, you're not. No, you're not. My electorate and the electorate of Riverina, our communities have been addressing the environmental needs of the basin for the last 200 years. And we know that if we don't get the environment right, then we can't continue to be productive. We actually can't grow efficiently and to make a living food and fibre. And we know the growing of food and fibre in turn generates the jobs, the transport sector jobs, the commercial jobs. It gives the small towns their populations who in turn can create a rich and wonderful community life. Our volunteering in our electorates is next to none because we know that all that tree planting and feral animal destruction and protection of the endangered species requires community voluntary work. We do it in our electorates, but what's this government done? It has simply dipped into our irrigators' markets at times when they were most vulnerable, when their lenders had their feet on the necks of our farmers. And Penny Wong, when she was minister, she said, here's a tender, you can sell your water to the Commonwealth, we'll pay a bit extra. And you know, we won't force you, so you're willing sellers. Well, you know what those willing sellers really were? They were drought, debt, stressed primary producers who had really pushed out their borrowings to buy extra feed to keep their herds alive, to buy extra expensive water to keep their fruit trees alive, to finish off their crops. That's who they were, who were the so-called willing sellers. And the banks were gleeful. They said, fantastic. A lot of our borrowers have really eroded their assets. A lot of our borrowers are in deep, deep strife. But here's Penny Wong and her tenders. You go put in a bid. And do you know, out of the electorate of Murray, we had over 400 gigalitres sold to the environmental water holder, which means that water has gone for all time out of production, when, do you know, this government could have invested not much more money in the buyback bin and actually had on-farm water use efficiency gains or actually invested in infrastructure. But as the member for Riverina pointed out, much more money was thrown at the water markets because it was easier and cheaper, and it served their purpose to say those rotten irrigators, they've over-allocated, the water's been over-allocated to them. In fact, they've been stealing water during the drought. Look at poor old South Australia's dried up lakes. Obviously the water was stolen upstream. And so that's what we have to put up with this plan. That false information, that false emphasis on buyback rather than investment in productivity, water saving and real enhancement of the environment. This plan is cynical, it's crude, it's unscientific, it is just a political instrument, and I am not going to simply wave it past. I'm not going to just stay silent and say, well, I really hope the coalition wins the next election, because then we can do something about it, because my electorate is suffering right now. We've actually got stranded assets right now. We've got people with dried-off farms who can't sell their dried-off farms in despair. We've got those paying more for their water because they're the only ones that are left. We've lost factories. We've lost jobs. We've got 200 empty shops in Shepparton. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to be silent. With the member for Riverina, I'm going to speak up for my electorate, and I'm going to say I know this vote will be lost, but I'm going to take a stand, a principled stand, because I am the member for Murray, and in the tradition of the great Sir John McEwen, who would have said the same things at the same time as a great countryman, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say no, and I'm going to try, having said no, when we're in government, to start again. I thank you.